Hi, everybody. My thanks goes out to everybody that sent questions. We have quite a few. Fortunately for us, I think we've had more uh, this week than we have had all year, which is quite amazing, actually. So keep them coming. It's really interesting. Can't cover them all tonight, but we'll start with some, and in May we'll do some more. Uh, this one is from Dominic Clark in Scotland, and he asks, what is the connection between the non-dual awareness space, non-duality awareness space, that is infinite and always present, that includes this body-mind and this life experience that is convinced that I am solely this body and mind? And then he asks, why, when I have an experience where I know I am not this body and mind, shall I still have a sense that it is happening to or through this individual? It's really interesting. This is a powerful question. First of all, that first aspect of the question isn't exactly as it's normally conceived to be true. Maybe you could try to put this one into your thoughts and see if it makes some sense to you. Why is the connection between non-dual awareness space? Non-dual awareness space, as you say, is infinite and always present. But then you could put a period there. And then you go on to say, which includes this body-mind. Philosophers and psychologists, spiritual types, human beings, I've been trying to make sense of this body-mind thing. And it tends to, the sense that is made of it is usually, maybe from Descartes, is based on an individual with a body and a mind. But it's referred to as an intellect that is really emotionally based, and a defense of emotion is involved with the duality base that we seem to be so, we find so valuable. So that was a small problem there with definitions and maybe understanding what that means. Non-duality base or awareness is involved with duality awareness. That's really frustrating in relationship to how you think and how you don't think. For example, only way I can do this is an example. For example, you can engage with what you believe to be true. For example, and everybody in the room can do the same thing. And if you really believe it's true, you can actually think that this is a non-duality concept. It's not. It's a duality concept. The non-duality idea is kind of like this. You're watching yourself engage as normally as you would call yourself engaging normally. A little confusing. As you engage normally, you can watch yourself engage normally. That particular kind of watching with no reaction whatsoever, none, whether it's elevating perceptions or deflating the way you say something, none of that is there. That's non-duality awareness. It gets often mixed up with two things. One thing that it gets mixed up with is if someone disagrees with what you say, there's an emotional reaction. The thought process in that emotional reaction The thought process in that emotional reaction will defend the emotional engagement because you are set up to learn how to defend yourself. That is not a non-duality engagement. That's a duality engagement. Because there's a yes, no, and right, wrong, and all that sort of stuff that goes on with everybody. There is a mental acuity where you can just about watch that stuff occurring. But you still have a propensity to assess others in that spot mentally, assessing what they think is true as non-true, as different than you, and you can listen to it, but there's no way you'll believe it. And this is still duality. It's kind of an in-between state between non-duality and duality. And a lot of people who do a lot of, let's say, thinking, maybe can be involved with that slightly differently. In other words, they don't necessarily agree with what they believe. That's a thinking process. You consider what it is you believe, you try to find out what that is, and then begin to look at it as if it may be still, there may be stuff still pending. Pending where? You don't know. Pending in terms of possibility, there may be something that you're missing. It's not complete. And in fact, if you get enough years in, you'll know almost everything that you engage with is really not complete. That's a mental level, but you still are searching for a completeness, and you do that by a small effect of non-duality status that sneaks in there to help you get to a state where your options are not even closely linked to what you believe your options are. They're expanded, they're broadened into a state where you are actually watching your mental facility at work and noticing that there are many spaces in what might be of value. Because the dilemma is that the mind and emotions have a very difficult time reading into those spaces of non-duality because they're there for perceiving as well as reading into. We are looking from the bottom up as opposed from the top down. Our nature is to read from the bottom up. You accumulate belief systems over time, and you try to make some sense of them and try to be involved with their relevance to see if it fits what you've already made up your mind must be true. When that happens, you're less concerned about defending what you come up with, which means some of your beliefs start to be different than what they were before. If you could notice that that's happened in the mind, then you would begin to notice that it's possible that it may happen again. You're slowly venturing into an aspect of you that's mentally based that will allow you to regain a relationship with curiosity that really basically doesn't have to believe what you currently believe. Curiosity of the mind. So and then you begin to realize when you're going through all of this stuff that you're not really engaging with your mental emotional system intellectual system based on that emotional structure, because you're not defending what you're thinking. You're moving into a state where suddenly, through the process of thinking, you recognize that you're at the edge of what you believe is available in your mind. You're at the edge of it. You're not going to jump into believing one way or another. You're at the edge of it. At that second, your emotional mind and that movement into the mental plane beyond the emotional defensive mind is willing to perceive what might be placed in your mind by the non-duality mental facility, or non-dual in some people's belief system, high astral facility, or the high physical brain nervous system's sensing of what is beyond what's already known. All three aspects of engagement of what one might call the base ingredients of a personality. But the personality becomes a willing implement. It implements, or a tool, it becomes a tool for perception that doesn't have anything to do with elevating the personal. It becomes a perceiver, an organism related to perception that is linking now into a receptivity mode which allows the non-duality mind to express itself. Kind of what one calls an intuitive internal perception sometimes is the influence of the non-duality mind or non-dual mind, and then in some small way either the mental or the intellectual aspect of the individual grabs onto what it can perceive through the auspices of how the personality has been constructed to make sense of things, but it has a narrow base through which it will allow that perception to occur. It's a narrow base. The broadening of the defensive belief system, intellectually, sometimes, when it senses something's off emotionally, in other words, not what they believe, emotionally, a person might believe, there is a reflex reaction to protect what it believes must be true. It moves past that element, but through that element, that mental, emotional element, one can perceive an intuitive, let's say, lighting up of something within the narrow framework. If it fits into what you, or close to, what you can allow to be valued, there will be a real insight, meaning a real recognition of an idea that drops into this head, because that's what we use in this. We tend to use this as a perceiving mechanism, drops into the head, and then we become excited momentarily about that, and we'll call that an intuitive interaction and perception by you. The personality had nothing to do with that except allow a perception to occur in the narrow base of what you believe could possibly be true. Sometimes study, sometimes a willful attempt to go beyond what you believe has to be true will insightfully allow that non-duality mind to express something other than what previously could be expressed in that narrow range initially. And so it will broaden the range, it will stretch the range. And you may have a whole statement, a sentence, a picture, an idea drop into the mechanism that the personality is using to validate itself, the head, nervous system, and you will consider this really interesting and a wonderfully highly developed state. The next state is that when the non-duality, non-dualistic mind moves into the mental state, quietens down the mental state, so that the mental state becomes kind of semi-unconscious. Not the individual. Not the individual. And this is bordering on a high relationship with the need to search the mind for an idea that the individual doesn't have. It may not come right away. It might be a day or two. The idea, for example, may prime the pump. You may be talking about a subject matter and suddenly another idea occurs. And so you begin to learn how to speak the idea. And then suddenly you come to the end of the idea, and now you're back in the mental phase. And the mental phase is just a little past the need to defend the intellectual mental phase. You understand I'm using words here that there are all kinds of definitions around. So I'm trying to show you 3 levels of engagement here, at least, so that you can begin to realize that that non-duality level has no interest in protecting itself. It doesn't need to. The personalized version of the mental state does need to. The most curious aspect of that self-protective state is when it doesn't protect against the emotional, intellectual phase where you're excited about knowing that this is right versus wrong. It moves into a mental state where that mental state is, it recognizes a belief. It recognizes that the belief doesn't only stand on its own. There's more to it, but just don't know what it is. And then it bends itself to be curious about, is there anything in the non-duality mind that might help it to understand beyond what it already currently believes? And that's called the stretch of the mind. The mental aspect, the intellectual aspect, begins to become quieter because it's looking for something beyond what it believes it already knows. Because its curiosity has one thing in mind: the need to go beyond what is known. Well, one thing in our world, there are so many people who have written so much stuff. We can never read it all. And another thing, they come at it from different points of view. That can sometimes give us clues. But then, in the final analysis, ultimately, as you've alluded to, Dominic, is that we're basically preparing ourselves to go beyond our basic need to believe that we're right, so that we can reinforce our personalities and not feel dumb. Well, nobody's dumb. It's just different levels of understanding, and everybody thinks their level of understanding is higher. And that's fine, because we're all in training. The objective is to train. And as many groups say, to be on the path is the objective. To be in a process of willingness to go beyond where you are now is vital. Otherwise, there's no interest in going beyond where you already are, because you already know something. Well, knowledge is infinite, so you can never know it all. Knowledge includes experience. Knowledge includes a deeper level of understanding where you begin to know that reflex reaction is normal, but it doesn't mean it's true. Defense of belief is normal. It doesn't mean it's the final piece of action. But in a process of looking beyond, there is always something that can stimulate the individual, if they're receptive, to link up with that higher state. The Hindus and the Buddhists are really interesting in this one, where it's conceivable that the mind becomes quiet. And that means there's an implication that there is a connection being developed between a higher state of so-called mind, which is part of our, it's a useful way of saying it takes you beyond what you already know. But the personalization in the non-duality is zero. The personalization in the duality element is always greater. We have a hard time understanding that. We have a big thing about whoever said it first must be right. Yeah, well, maybe. But whoever said it first is just somebody who said it first. 15 people or 2 people can do the same thing. Different places in the world. It's very interesting. If you look at science, you'll find out, and if you look at other things as well, usually science is what you look at. More than one person is looking at the same thing somewhere else in the world. It's my belief, possibly only a belief, that it's basically so that we won't miss it as a species, that others are thinking some similar things, so basically the species can move forward. And then what do you do with the thing that we figure out, or that's given to us? Well, in our world, we consider ourselves the figure-outer, in quotation marks. If you have something in your head, it makes you famous or infamous, depending on how you're engaging with other people, or how other people see what you say. That's legitimate. That's how we work it in this world. It doesn't mean it's true. It just means that's what happens. It's the experience of an engagement with the personality is in the process of development as a human being. And whatever that human being's in the old tradition was God-man, good God. You can't say that out loud too often. But it really means developing. And if one being develops in some belief systems, that means that that development is in the astral mental planes. It holds there. It vibrates so that the next group of people or person can be drawn by it and helped by the vibration that's there, because it vibrates at a level that would be helpful to the next being who's at the edge of uncovering the reality that it is an organism for the use of the non-duality beingness. In some people's view, a higher truth beyond all belief and comprehension, as a matter of fact. But it includes experience. And this one is really interesting because the experience of it in our world must be kept secret. Because under the rubric that we use for an engagement with expression, we would call that delusion. Because we're still looking at it from a lower perspective, meaning from the personality perspective that relates to being valued as a personality. And in fact, in that state, it's not about value at all. That non-duality mind doesn't equate this dilemma of devaluation if you're not able and high evaluation if you are. It relates to states. You're at a state where you are approaching an engagement capability that is beyond the capability that you currently have. Wow. When it occurs, it's exciting. So you grab the ball and dive down deep into the water again. And you say, see what I got? I got a ball. Whoa. And you've never seen this kind of ball before. I am the first one to grab this ball. This is normal for us. This is not negative. But it's noted, presumably, by higher states that know full well that this is normal in the process of anyone's development. That's why, as people grow, as beings grow on this level, as they leave this plane, their astral mental planes are hooked into different states that they've achieved, and their engagement with existence goes on. It vibrates there for all time. So anyone who's ever reached that state before is still not them personally, the way we see personal, but that state itself that they've achieved is vibrating there for the purpose of engaging with those who are close to and near that vibrational state. I'm sorry to say that I don't know the exact inches that you have to be to it before it takes over your relationship with life. Otherwise, that would be the details that would make us very interesting. Actually, those details are of hardly any consequence whatsoever, because you would only notice them after the state is linking up stronger and stronger. The key in this is the state hooks up and slowly gets stronger through the activity of a personal, moving away from the personalization of self-importance as the non-duality state gets stronger and stronger. The form itself still occupies the need to survive. If you think about this, it creates a dilemma for some of our thinking. There is a great need to realize that our personalities are important for survival. Take a look at your personalities. Meet the next 15 people and notice the slight changes that you make in your personality to engage with that person. 15 of them. And notice that you have a modicum of flexibility that is really valuable, so that you can engage with various people with no disrespect, and no disrespect to yourself, and then begin to realize that this is what we are. We're kind of an organ of expression that spends most of its time expressing itself at a certain level, because the level itself demands it. If you did not know how to function at this level, and often that can happen, especially after initiations, for a time. If you do not know how to function you run the risk of being in trouble with this plane. This is not a negative thing. It's as if, I hate to say this out loud, a reconstruction of a form that can reach back and help itself in some things but not others. And you are reframing your mind, reconstructing your mental facility as well as your emotional facility in a kind of a different way, but still not, there's no perfection there. It's just, you're just reconstructing. And you're trying to make sense of what's going on, and finally you get to the point where you can make some sense of it because you're perceiving your experience within it. That's related to initiations. And there's no trophy. There's learning how to deal with those states. And those higher mental states, or higher states of experiential response and perception, are not always easy to deal with. The lower states, extensions of the personality, of the five senses, for example, are eventually taken away from you. Now, this is something no one wants to hear. But they are interacted with for the purpose of being helpful to others. You become less important, but still important, because you need to survive, and you have to function at this level. But you move into a different level of understanding, and it doesn't make you perfect. Matter of fact, sometimes you perceive too much, and you don't know what to do with it. So you have to learn how to balance off your natural previous experience with emotion and self-aggrandizement, because basically that is nurtured in you from the time of your birth, so that you'll have a fairly decent sense of self, so you can survive in a world that is focused here. No disrespect meant to anybody. None of us get this perfectly. So you do what you can. And that process is valuable because you make mistakes. Just because you have initiations on whatever levels, you still need to learn how to function. In the non-duality state, that is a fairly decently respectful state. But just one other idea. It can engage with any state level you're in. Just think about that for a second. Look to your own life experience, if you can. And notice that sometimes you were about to engage physically with something and you maybe didn't. Or you weren't about to engage and you did. It's an influence of a non-duality mind. Mind affects all levels, including body, including emotion, including our mental states that are so wondrous here and highly toted. Same is true of your emotional disposition. You gain access to a knowledge and you're really happy about that because it gives you an image identifiable by others. And you notice that sometimes what you speak is related to your personality, not necessarily related to a truth that even you agree with. Immediately, you should deal with that and say, you know what, I'm not sure I agree with it. Or something like that. I mean, you'd have to talk the way you talk. Just so you know, because you are training you as well as something else within you, helping you to go beyond the you that you've already constructed. Image identity and all. The mental level is interesting too. If you do end up with an unconscious mind, it doesn't mean you won't react emotionally. It doesn't mean that you'll automatically do everything perfectly. This is misunderstanding. And it doesn't mean that everything you think of is exactly true. I'll give you an example. You may have an idea come into your mind that is so profoundly interesting to the way you think currently. The natural reaction would be to back away with an idea that is wondrous and just profound. Wonderful idea. And it is. But that idea is given to you so that you can mull it over. And it will prepare you for the next idea that you get. In the meantime, you're making you superior or glossy or glowing in your own view, or not. And all of a sudden, the next idea pops in, and it doesn't necessarily agree with the one that popped in before. Now, this is interesting. But it does give you an insight into the new idea. And if you hadn't had the first one that really kind of congeals with and mixes with the way you normally think, you would never understand the second one. This is process and learning. And we're about learning. This is wondrous from my perspective, and I guess from many people that I know. Because you leave the door open to go beyond what you already know. This is exciting. The most wonderful place, as far as I'm concerned, in our world now, is moving beyond what we have known for centuries in the relationship with philosophy, religion, science. And I think, dangerously, we take one step at a time and we jump to conclusions all over the place. And this is the most natural thing in our dualistic world. And we're deeply indebted to our dualistic, so-called dualistic world, according to our friend from France. But it doesn't mean that the ultimate way of thinking this way, and it was a great idea for all kinds of reasons, because it moves us forward, and we're getting to the point where we can be moved forward again, because we're not always agreeing with how we see that we've learned something. Doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means it's movable, can be broadened out a little bit more, and reconsideration might be of some value. That will happen with many people. Tremendous. Especially when you're talking about the non-dualistic mind. It is wondrous, one could say, likely, that no matter what we do, we can still learn. No matter how important you become, you can still learn beyond what you know. I think that's exciting. I hope you do too. Thanks, Dominic. I hope that was something that made some sense. There's another question here from Pat Donahue in New Jersey. And she says, my question is about feeling as if I don't know what is coming next. I can't see my way to making decisions or plans just now. Is this a part of a defensive structure of doubt and confusion, or is it sometimes an aspect of growing that we aren't able to see the next steps that would be the best for service to ourselves and others, and we get to try to be aware and listen for guidance? a little bit of that non-dualistic kind of idea. Yep, could be. It depends what your internal background is. If your internal background is to not do something because you can't figure out what to do, and this is a good defense, so you end up doing nothing, then you're following the natural, normal way of engagement. But you're seeing it, you've begun to see it better. And this is really positive. Seeing it in a kind of a funny way, a little bit demands reflection. You become reflexive a bit. Too much reflection, of course, you won't do anything. But there is something that you can do, and that is broaden out your engagement with life a bit. Even if you don't know if it's the right thing or the wrong thing. So just start doing a few things. Like if you have hobbies and you haven't done them for a while, extend them a bit. Get out and start doing them again. What you're really feeding in there is activity. And that can be constructive in that you do them for a little while. Things like learning languages, I don't care what, playing chess, something that'll stimulate the mental facility out of the emotional reflex not to do or to do. It's a kind of a small thing, it sounds like, but it's not that small. Because once you start stimulating a little bit of the mental facility past the defense, it will engage again, and an idea will come to you. Idea could be really simply because you're using your mind to do crossword puzzles or go out and do the things that you might call, hobbies. You can go to some musical, cultural things. I know you like that stuff, Pat, so just do it. Or pick up a game that you never played before. Get somebody to teach you how to do it. And you'll get a little bit excited, or you'll say, oh God, do I have to do this? Whatever it is, you'll know what those responses are. And if those responses are a little bit negative, it's an emotional thing that you're going through. And the emotion is fighting back, not to get you to grow too quickly. It wants to be in charge. And remember, we were talking about that perception of the solar plexus often is within, let's say, a relative degree of acceptance to anything. Because how you engage with life and have cultivated your emotional, natural, reflexive response that is needed to defend you in your life and how you function in life. It will be, by doing something, it will shift off of that just a little bit. It wants to be the boss. If a person comes up with something, a natural trait, and you come up with, no, that's not the way it is. It's more like this, it's like that. And I know it's like that. You might consider that emotionally defending what you already believe is valuable for you. Broaden that out a little bit. You may listen a little longer. Watching it is a key. If you can notice it's occurring and watch what happens after that, you may find yourself insisting that what you think must be true. Be okay with allowing yourself to say, something? It'll be hard to say. But something? I'm not sure that's true, but I think it's true. You're actually attempting to engage with what Dominic was talking about, the non-dualistic mind that is not controlled by the personality. Personality is just where it has its abode, at least an aspect of it. By the way, it has its abode in everybody. whatever you put your focus to, it will try to help you to learn through what you're focusing on, positive or negative. It just says, keep saying, do you see this? Do you see? We don't hear that very well. Do you see that? You see what it's doing? We still don't hear it very well. Until we get to the point where we say, I see it, but I don't know what to do with it. Okay. Now, the defense is there, but maybe what you can do is try and stretch out. Read stuff you wouldn't read. I know I say that all the time. Read it because it might be valuable to stretch your engagement with what you know you can read. It's just one thing. What you know you can listen to. What you know you can do. You're stretching just a little bit to get outside that originating balance that you call personality. Okay? Check out to see with what you're doing. See if what you're doing is normal for you. Be okay with that. It's not a judgment. It's just a notation. My God, I do that a little bit. Aha, okay, that's fine. Now where do you go? I just wrote a couple of things down just in case I forgot them. And emphasis on watching to see, not jumping in and judging them. Please. It doesn't help. Lifting up how important you are because you think a certain way doesn't help either. Use the energy moments that you note in your question. And sometimes you don't know what to do. It could be an energy moment. If it is, right in the midst of it, you can ask for help for it. Give me a hand with that. It's holding me in a position, and I'm not sure, it might be emotional or it could be a little defensive, so that I won't allow myself to move. And hopefully I won't see it, it says, and I'll just remain there. It's okay. It's all right. It's trained to do that. It's not a bad thing. It's just how it's trained to do it. And then use your physical body. If it is emotional, walking will help. Swimming, God forbid I would say that out loud, but swimming will actually help. Help a lot. It'll discharge that emotional, vibratory intensity that tends to be stuff around no. Yes. It'll do that, at least, and give you a chance for seconds to be okay with not necessarily engaging. And it will, with it, and it will enable you to negotiate with yourself to go beyond a little bit of the natural tendencies that you might have as you see them, because you know you are growing through you. The seer is you. The perceiver, you are trying to perceive how you function so that you can broaden out and soften down the need to defend that place, and broaden out and go beyond that place just a little bit at first. I hope that helps a little, Pat. How are we doing? We have another one here from Chiffon in Vancouver Island. And let's see. She believes that she's being really stretched energetically, and that she's holding on. I'm just reading here, as you can probably figure that one out for yourself. If the stretch is there, Siobhan, it's usually because there are changes occurring inside. Usually those changes are related to stretching out how you are and adding something to it, and you may not be noticing exactly what's being added yet, but you're trying to learn how to soften down the emotion and engage with stretching out the personality so you can literally basically talk to it. Communication is a key thing. You're really talking to it and say, look, what I'm trying to do here is slightly different than what I've trained you to do. Emotional based orientation. Intellectual orientation, same thing. You can redirect the emotional mind, because the emotional mind is a bit of a reflexive, intense intensity that is very useful for the personality. It's not negative at all, but nonetheless, trying to align with another state of mind or another state of the within the astral plane, a buddhi plane, or a plane that is connected to the emotion but at a higher state, which really is basically higher than the emotional defensive mind. And you're trying to connect there just so that you can see aspects that are related to how things are there, but not judging them best you can. Trying to be positive actually does help. It's almost like redirecting your mental facility from the emotional reflex to another facility, somewhat similar to what I was talking about with Pat. So you could broaden out that way by, I know you like to read from time to time, and you might try, if you read nonfiction, try reading fiction. Try to get something to read that isn't kind of negative. You know, there's a propensity out there these days to write about families that are just really difficult. And of course you read that stuff and you start thinking, oh God, that's pretty negative. I wish I hadn't read that book. Or you say, isn't that wonderful? Now I understand how it is with me. No, not necessarily. But it can put you in that direction. Read something that is curious. Science fiction, fantasy. You have I know lots of spiritual stuff that is interesting, but remember, you start reading some really traditionally older bouts of Buddhism and Hinduism, and these will shift, or Christianity, or Hebrew orientation, or Islamic orientation, whatever your orientations are. What it will do, it will shift your state. You will feel better. But also taking in the relationship with that state, you can have stronger responses because it makes you more able to engage with stronger emotions, validate what you already believe. It's not a negative thing, but just keep that in mind. Broaden out. Reach for hobbies that are not frequented by you. And you're a pretty decent physical engager, so some of that really helps. And do some thinking while you're walking. And there's a neat trick that I always thought was really great in the 70s. Find something that you can laugh at. It's really worthwhile. Don't make it, I only laugh under these circumstances. Just laugh. Make yourself be okay. Lots of television programs, if you can find one you can laugh at. God forbid, I just expressed myself. I don't see too much humor where it's supposed to be humorous. But it's maybe my weird way of looking at humor. I think you're doing all the right things according to what you're using the tools, you're using energy. It increases your relationship with growth. There's no question about that. These work. So you also have to be okay with your personality wanting to remain in a place where the evaluation of life all around you is conditional based on what you already know. It's a tough one there, but nonetheless, do the best you can with that. I think it's about 5 minutes to, hopefully I think this one might be a little shorter and I'm not sure. It's from Betty Towson in England. And why is it that most of the time we are not necessarily aware of our own energies? And then at other times, they're so loud that it can overwhelm us and they're so strong. I believe our own energies are on the left side of the bodies. Is that correct? Betty, from my perspective, I can only do it from my perspective. The old mystical orientation was always focused on the east being the origins of the incoming energy, and that is the left side. The north, the west, the south. And from my perspective, energy can come in from every area. If your chest has come on a little bit, and your neck has come on more, as it has, and it moves that solar plexus past what it believes valuable in the personality, then you're going to be engaging with different kinds of energy. What you're used to, you'll perceive less. What you're not used to, you'll perceive more until you perceive it all the time, and then you have to really calm yourself down to perceive what's going on at that point. A hint, when you're calm, you can notice every place within you where energy is. That's one good reason for meditation, right? Since I know you're a meditator. And all of the system is related to higher states. Every part. Ultimately, the whole system, from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head, to 3 feet above, to 3 feet below, beyond, all around you, is all one chakra. Seldom ever taught about that. It is one center. In each of those centers that you have are different levels or different engagements with different parts. And they're there so that they can handle different kinds of frequencies that can be handled by an individual in the process of growth. They're not all opened at the same time. We cannot deal with that. Because if everything was open, we would be glowing fully all around. Your personality would not exist. Flow would be operating through you for the help of others, exactly in the place where they need the help, no more, no less. It would not be influenced by you at that state. The you that you believe you are now. You would be a different you. You would know that non-duality state, so-called, that many people talk about it as if it's mind. It is more than mind from my perception, but nonetheless, it's a way of speaking, so we all have ways of speaking. In a kind of a way, the energy is coming in from all areas. If you cannot perceive it on your right side, it's because the energy is too close to your personality orientations. If you cannot perceive it on your left side, it's too close to your personality orientations. If you cannot perceive it all, it's because your focus is on your personality orientations. This is neither good nor bad, it's just how it works. As you slow down your need to focus, you begin to focus on you as a being of consciousness or energy, and you begin to notice where the energy is moving through you. It can be moving through you in many ways, linking up even, and you have forgotten how to perceive it. You may have perceived it before. A line of reference all through the system does not mean that any of us are extra special. It just means we are in a state related to the occurrence of how the energy operates through those centers relative to how you are now. Tomorrow, different ball game maybe. But we have beliefs all in and around all of these things, which are trying to be helpful to us. And as a personality, of course, we always want to believe that we're in a very high state. It makes us feel more comfortable. What would you choose? Feeling good or not so far? Not so good. Yep, me too. Feeling good, I mean. Might as well. Options are few. Might as well be the good one. And that's part of how we engage with our relationship with the personal. You're very fortunate that you can notice when there is an influx of energy. You can perceive that as so. I know this to be true. We've talked about this many times. That's a good thing. The uncomfortable thing about it all is trying to learn how to soften down reflexive reactions to something that we really feel a little bit uncomfortable with before our link-ups are softer. So you can ask for softer link-ups. And I suspect that that is a very, very good thing to do for all of us. No matter what state you happen to be in, still ask for it. Because we are personally engaged with this form for the purpose of survival. And it's legitimate that we attempt to understand it from that perspective until we understand it from a different perspective. Currently, our beliefs run the show. Eventually, our experience begins to run the show, and we call those experiences, or we engage with them relative to our beliefs and how others believe. Eventually, and that truly helps us, kind of, unless we get all fluffed up about our value. Our value as a growing being is in the aiding of another. That shows up by energy flowing through us for the purpose that relates directly to the other, not to us. At best, at the very best for us, our link-ups occur because we are watching it occur. We begin to perceive that it is actually true that it is occurring. We have added nothing. That causes stronger link-ups within. If these stronger link-ups occur, then once again we must engage with those and try to soften down our natural, normal reactions that relate to a close past where we felt comfortable and comforted by how we believed things were. Things are just changing, and they will continue to do so with every growing being. Thank you all for listening, and I hope maybe some of this was of help. Good night.